So recently online, I've been seeing a resurgence of this fun fact, the cooperative eye hypothesis in ecology, evolution, anthropology spaces. And so maybe you clicked on this video because you saw a thumbnail about it by Edge Science, or maybe you read a Forbes article about it a couple years ago, or maybe you were in the class, the human bio class that I TA'd for this semester. And either way, have hopefully heard about it, and if not, the cooperative eye hypothesis is a hypothesis that aims to explain variation in human eye structure in relation to human cooperation. What is the cooperative eye hypothesis, and where does it originate from? So these are things I will answer here. The cooperative eye hypothesis was first coined by Michael Tomasello in around 2007, or similarly called the gaze signaling eyes hypothesis by Hiromi Kobayashi and Shiro Kohshima, which all together kind of try to explain this in a way that states that, okay, the reason humans have white around the sclera of their eyes, which, if you look up here, is all the white around the black pupil and iris I have. The reason we have that is for being able to tell the gaze direction, or the being able to signal our gaze to other humans, other conspecifics in this regard. So when I look over here, you can tell I'm looking over there even if I don't have my hand up, and you can tell I'm looking the other way now just because of the way that my eyes are outlined by all of the white in the sclera. And the reason they call it the cooperative eye hypothesis is because they think this has a role in communication, and many, many researchers like them think this way, right? But how do they come up with this hypothesis? Kobayashi and Kohshima in 2001 speculate a lot of this based off of a correlation they found across primates between human eye shape and eye color that makes them significantly different from other primates. And you can see this even visually, looking up a couple pictures of primates as we have here. Firstly, they found that the human eye obviously has a lot more white in the sclera. And then secondly, they found that human eye width, we'll do a little bit of ASMR here. Human eye width was much larger than other primates. And from that data, they figured two things were pretty apparent. That the white sclera was for making our eyes more apparent, as I mentioned before, and that the eye width was for giving us a little more room to do cool stuff like directional movements, and even expressing things like eye rolling or like other human emotions, right? And you can imagine this is beneficial in all sorts of pro-social behaviors like gossiping or telling secrets, or even something like hunting where you're like, hey, look over there, but you don't want to say shit because it's a short-faced bear or something like that, right? But this is all correlational data, and it's kind of just speculation at this point. So in 2007, Tomasello, who then coins it, like I mentioned before, actually explicitly tests this hypothesis by comparing the gaze-following behavior of adult primates and infant humans at 12 and 18 months old. These great apes were all raised in captivity, and they picked from a variety of species. And the human babies were all from a German neighborhood or something like that. But to compare them, they were made to watch a human experimenter in their gaze and see if they could follow both their eye gaze and their directional movements of their head in suit. The experimenter would, in some trials, just move their eyes, and in other trials, move their eyes in the opposite direction of where their head is moving. It's more difficult than I thought it would be. Oh. Right? And the goal was for the primate or the infant to correctly follow the eyes and not just the head, or not the head, just the eyes, right? They found that, unsurprisingly, infants follow the eyes much better, the eyes of human experimenters much better than primates did. And primates tended to follow the head just as well as the infants did, but from behind. Both of them actually followed around the same quality, right? So surely then this is proof that the cooperative eye hypothesis fits. Well, there are a number of, small but important flaws with this experiment. In comparing human infants vision to great apes, we are inevitably confounding variables. These infants were raised with a human mother with frequent exposure to humans and human body cues, whereas a lot of these primates, yes, they had experience and some of them were raised in captivity, they inevitably spend a majority of their time with other primates. Additionally, infants are at a more plastic period in their development, may be more evolutionarily and developmentally more in tune to looking at the glare of other humans. Secondly, and I think this gets really more to the core of the problem here, is that this hypothesis is suggesting that if we have these traits as humans, we are more cooperative, or that it's more of an advantage to cooperative humans than it is to other primates, which are less cooperative then, inevitably. Additionally, it suggests that it's correlated with greater socio-cognitive function. This is sort of the inverse of the gaze camouflage hypothesis, which suggests that individuals should benefit from less salient sclera. By less salient, I just mean darker sclera, to obfuscate their movements and motives from competitors in their environment, right? This opposing hypothesis attempts to explain away all of these questions we would have about cooperation with the white sclera by saying, oh, well, other primates like chimpanzees exhibit a lot of deception and have dark sclera, so it must mean that it's for that reasoning, and we don't exhibit any deception at all. But we know we're not the most cooperative animals in all of Metazoa. That's the bees and everything like that. We may exhibit larger and more specialized groups than other primates, but this doesn't necessarily mean we're more altruistic or cooperative than other primates. Although a number of studies have shown that humans are shockingly altruistic in lab conditions. To a greater extent than other primates, especially bonobos or gibbons, we also exhibit cooperation, deception, and violence. Now, am I trying to disprove this specific test done in 2007 and say, oh yeah, this whole thing is totally wrong and these scientists are idiots? No, it's not true, and it would be unfruitful to kind of even go down that rabbit hole. The hypothesis is interesting and, fun to think about, but at this point in 2007, it's a cool bit of speculative evolution and doesn't really have the evidence to dignify it at this point. But what about now, in 2026? A little disappointing, but at this point, we don't really have great evidence for the cooperative eye hypothesis, or CEH. A lot of this work has come from Caspar et al. 2021 and Perea Garcia et al. 2025. So why don't we have evidence that it works? Well, Kobayashi and Kohshima run into a number of issues with their original dataset that I wasn't telling you about. One is that they used a very small sample size for collecting data on great apes. And they missed out on one big thing, which is that other primates actually do show depigmentation of the eye. Gorillas and orangutans actually show a great deal of depigmentation. Later studies have found that there are no significant differences between the depigmentation in our eyes and the depigmentation of some other primate species. Though the depigmentation of our eyes is still true looking face forward, but from an averted gaze, there is no difference in the size of that white. So the eye width doesn't seem to hold up as much, and the whiteness of the sclera seems to be more apparent across groups. So, okay. But overall, it seems like the human population has a lot less variation in that, right? Well, 2 is the other issue we missed out on. There is a lot of species level and inter-individual level variance running out of space here. A lot of species and inter-individual level variance in the eye structure across other groups, right? And even within humans, the main reason they missed out on it earlier is because they only used Japanese populations of humans to test this, and later only used Japanese and other European populations to confirm these kinds of studies. But we actually find that across a latitudinal gradient, there is a decrease in the depigmentation of the eye. The third problem they run into is that plenty of other mammals actually do follow gaze really well, including goats, despite having pigmentation in the sclera. So let's draw 3 here. It would have been hard for them to pick up on this because they're only looking at other primates, but other primates actually don't follow gaze the way we do. Another problem associated with this is that we are so good at following gaze that we actually follow the gaze of other primates basically as well as we follow our own gaze. So in other studies, they've looked at chimpanzee eyes and found that humans follow them just as well as they could follow another human's eyes. And lastly, in the many, many years since 2007, there have not been many other experiments to test the cooperative eye hypothesis. Yet, it remains, and it is very popular for whatever reason. But what is that reason? Why is it so popular, despite there being a pretty resounding academic consensus that it's not as valid as we used to think it was? And I'm not saying this to disparage any of Tomasello's works. Yeah, I magically cleaned the screen. Especially because in a lot of their discussion, they mention some of these things very fairly. They're very fair about what they can actually conclude from their original study and what can be said going forward. But why is it so popular despite all of this new evidence that it's kind of bunk? Well, for one, and by adaptationist reasoning, I just mean, or by adaptationism, I don't necessarily mean that adaptation isn't true on the other end. I just mean that adaptationists tend to make light of everything and turn every single trait into an adaptation. Not every trait is an adaptation to an organism. Some traits are just what they are. They did not evolve necessarily in response to a environmental stimuli, but rather your heart evolved because you need to beat blood around your body. You need to pump blood around your body. Golden Lewontin's 1979 paper, where they describe a lot of traits as spandrels or historical elements of an organism, more related to their lineage than they necessarily are to the specific environmental conditions at this time. But that's a lot more boring in most cases, especially on the internet, than adaptationism is. It's much more interesting to say that the bridge of your nose evolved to hold your eyeglasses, or that your kneecaps evolved to block your fall. But we know that's not actually true. Human exceptionalism is incredibly popular, and any traits we can find to make ourselves seem more exceptional or different from other organisms usually gets a lot of clout. And we like this, yes, at baseline because it's like, oh, humans are fascinating and interesting. That's very true. We have a lot of fascinating traits. There's a lot of cool stuff that goes into the evolution of humans that I do not discredit. But it seems like it's very popular online and in broader spaces, not because our evolutionary origins are fascinating for some particular reason, but because they are inherently interesting, because they justify and consolidate our superiority over other animals. It's not just that we are different from other animals, it's that we are better than them. We like to know that we're smarter, that we can run longer distances than more animals. We like to know that we have properties like sweating and throwing and longer, bipedal limbs. Not because, oh, that's a cool property, but because it gives us an advantage over them. And this justifies later on, of course, the treatment of other animals. Because otherwise, why don't we study things like the very, very small physiological or biochemical differences between us and other animals? Something as simple as a single amino acid change is technically true and would split us cleanly from a lot of other animals, but when biologists try to draw a line between humans and all other animals, they don't want to draw that kind of line. They want to draw a line like all other animals don't have language. Humans have language. Okay, we find out that's not true. Oh, all other animals don't exhibit tool use. We exhibit tool use. And then we find out that's not true. And they keep moving the goalpost forward and forward and forward until eventually you're going to hit a point where you realize that many of the differences between humans and other animals are quantitative rather than qualitative. And the cooperative eye hypothesis is just one small gear in that whole machine. But it's important for recognizing why it can become so popular. Reels are bad. And so are YouTube Shorts. And they're fundamentally not places of scholarship. Now, is it bad to hear a fun fact and think it's cool and to follow creators that do science and that post on these platforms? No, not at all. But you have to recognize that these places were never meant for a careful and close reading of the literature. When you're throwing out this little fun fact at a party, just remember that you should probably fact check these things sometimes, because reals equals bad. That's proven. To have a really strong grasp of the literature, you need to read the literature, and none of that stuff was ever meant to fit in 60 seconds. But luckily for you, I'm doing a YouTube video that is going to be longer than I wanted it to be. So this is the whole video. Thanks for watching. If you are any of the lead researchers on any of these stuff, thanks. Not hating on you guys. It was great. Just had to bug to pick about it. Yeah, thanks to RavSucks for editing and all the production of this. And thanks to Callen Inman for helping me edit some of this script. Goodbye.